I believe in public education, and I believe all children should have the same opportunities and quality of education.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
I wanted to introduce Terri Michal, and I'm excited to have Terri on the show. One of the things that I really like about Terri is that she is a tenacious activist. We first met, gosh, it's been probably 8 or 9 years ago. We were both getting involved in education, activism, and organizing around the same time. I was still kind of getting my feet wet as a teacher, and Terri had already been active in the Huntsville City Schools arena, as well as the statewide arena. So we have known each other for several years, been in the struggle together, fought a lot of the same jerks together. So if I can get my camera set up real quick, and then I'll have Terri introduce herself. All right, Terri. So thank you for being here. We appreciate it. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what got you involved in education, activism, and organizing.
Well, thank you for having me on. And I really, appreciate this. And Adam, you and I have known each other for a long time, and I've always respected you. So this is just amazing opportunity to spread some knowledge, which is what you guys do at the Valley Labor Report all the time. So thank you for having me on. So real quick, if I And what got me involved was that 3 out of my 4 children are teachers here in Alabama. And when my oldest daughter started teaching in Huntsville, I really realized that something was not right. I didn't know what it was, though. My children went to schools in Madison, Alabama public schools. And so once she started teaching in Huntsville schools, and I started learning more about the Title I schools, then I realized that not all children in Alabama get the same quality education. I know I should have known that, and I wish I would have learned earlier, but once I knew it, I couldn't unknow it. Right. And so that's when I started really fighting for all children. I believe, when you're talking about, being punished by your zip code or whatever, I felt like children in public education weren't getting the quality that they should based on where they live. And so to me, public education is the foundation of our country. 90% of people go to public schools. And look at what we have done. Look at what the people that have graduated from public schools in our country have done. We've produced some of the top scientists and doctors, and I won't go on about it because we all know. So when they started talking about our schools being broken, I'm like, what? Something's broken, but I don't think it's our schools. And that led me to the privatization movement. And that's when I learned, that there really was an agenda there to label a lot of our schools as failing. So, what I say is there's a lot of money to be made in failure. Mm-hmm. And that's how I got started back in 2012 in Huntsville. In 2014, I came to Birmingham because AFT, the American Federation of Teachers, were running into me all the time at the legislature and everywhere else. And they're like, we need to hire you. I'm like, okay, I can get paid for this. So that kind of put me on the path of where I am now.
That's outstanding. Yeah. I think you and I sort of entered into staff roles also around the same time, which was interesting, you with AFT and me with AEA. So I wanted to switch gears a little bit there. You mentioned AFT. Could you talk to us about, first of all, what is your role with them? What do you do? And just give us a profile of the union. Talk to us about who are your members? What do y'all do?
Well, I am so excited to be working for AFT. The amazing thing is that the work that we did through the pandemic in representing for our members and making sure we had clean schools, that we had, a safe environment, that the PPE was being readily available, all of those things, we really fought for. And when we felt like that these things weren't being provided, we're able to apply that pressure. And the school system stepped up and then provided. So also with the emergency family leave and other things that the CARES Act provided for, we were one of the first ones actually to notify employees in public education of what their rights were, about how they can get time off if they get COVID, if their children get COVID, their husband gets COVID, that there was a lot of things being provided. And we were actually the first people in Alabama to really break that down and tell people what their rights were. So I'm really proud of the work that AFT has done, especially through the pandemic. And it has been reflective in how our membership has grown since then. It's really been incredible in that we have so many people leaving the profession. In particular, the older teachers are retiring because they're like, this is not what I signed up for. Education has really deviated from educating our children and has gotten into the weeds. And so even though that was happening, AFT was able to actually increase our membership, which was amazing in a right to work state. And so I'm really proud of the work that we have done to protect our teachers. I want to emphasize that in protecting our teachers, we're protecting our children. AFT, doesn't technically work for the parents or the children, but we recognize that our students' learning environment is our teachers' working environment. They go hand in hand. You cannot separate them. And that's why I do what I do, because I have not compromised my thoughts, my speech, my intentions. Everything that I began in 2012 just naturally rolled over into AFT. And especially through this pandemic, we have stood strong in representing our members and our students. So was there another question I didn't touch on?
No, I think that's fantastic. That's what I was looking for. In terms of just kind of getting to the nuts and bolts of it, who exactly is in Birmingham AFT? Like, who all is part of the membership? Is it just teachers or?
So thank you for that question. So in Birmingham AFT, we are mostly in central Alabama, and Birmingham, we have Birmingham, of course, and then Fairfield and Midfield. And we have a lot of other systems asking us to come in, and we're trying to work that out. But in public education, almost all employees can be in Birmingham AFT. The thing that we don't do is have bosses, because of course that's what unions do. Unions don't have bosses because we don't have that conflict. We know what side of the table we are on and who we are representing. So the bus drivers, the custodians, the cafeteria workers, the teachers, just on and on. Anyone who does not hire and fire Birmingham AFT or AFT here in Alabama can represent.
All right. Yeah. Thank you for that distinction. I think that's very important to note, that, a superintendent and an HR director cannot be a member of the union with Birmingham AFT, which is a pretty important distinction from others.
Right. So, and right now, if I can't say this real quick, as you guys know, unions, they're like at an all-time high since 1970, from what I understand. Union participation is at an all-time high. And so what I try to show folks is that look at Amazon, Look at Starbucks. Look at all these companies that are fighting to organize. And so that's because the worker through the pandemic has really come together and realized, you know what? They don't operate without us. They need us. We have power and we demand our rights. And so, that has been pretty powerful that we can point to Amazon, especially here in Alabama, and the Starbucks and say, look, people are understanding the power of the unions. And so I believe that's also why Birmingham AFT is even more successful, because people are understanding that, we need them. We need to be protected. And so that's kind of exciting to me, being someone that's fought for so long like I have.
Absolutely. And that's something that most of our listeners in Alabama probably are aware of in terms of belonging to a union as an education employee is an option, but it's certainly by no means required. And there are not collective bargaining agreements in public schools in Alabama. So it's a matter of advocacy and organizing more so than sitting down at the negotiating table. So it is different from what you might get with, say, AFT chapters in Chicago, for example. That's the biggest one. That's the one that has been most inspiring for me. But we are at a different terrain here in Alabama versus Chicago. So one thing I thought has been really interesting in seeing your journey is that you were elected to a term on the Birmingham School Board, and I'm really curious what that experience was like, especially coming into it as someone who does have this background in grassroots organizing, education, and labor activism. I've thought about it for myself. Like, what would it even be like if I were sitting on a school board? Would it drive me insane? I feel like it probably would. So you lived it. Tell us, what was that like?
So I went into it kind of, starry-eyed, like you, Adam. It's like, what can I do? What can I accomplish? I told folks when I was on the campaign trail, I've been a grassroots organizer. I've been a union organizer. Now I want to try my voice as an elected official from the inside. To me, that was just very exciting. I had been to all but 5 Birmingham board meetings from 2014 to 2017.
Right.
So I knew the school system, and I was really excited to be on the board and try to work the process from the inside. All I could say is I'm very naive because, I was just one of 9. And also the conversation around the privatization movement, i.e. vouchers and charter schools, is very complex. And I was talking, I don't mean this in a negative way, but I was talking at a different level. I came into it talking about things that Alabama hadn't caught up with yet, because I do follow national education issues with the badass teachers. They've just been amazing. Network for Public Education, they backed me in both elections. So I had knowledge from all over this country. And so I don't think that Birmingham was quite ready for it. And a lot of the conversation I was trying to have didn't really strike a chord with folks on the board. That's not to say they were bad people, but I was just 1 out of 9 that was talking. I like to say that I speak 2 languages. I speak English and I speak privatization. And so I had a really good grasp about what was going on in Birmingham and how our children were being turned into dollar signs. But to really turn my knowledge into votes, 9 people on the board, I had to have 5 votes. So besides me, I had a 4. And really getting folks on board with the conversation that I was having was very difficult. And that's something I really wasn't prepared for. And that's on me. That's on me. But it's such a complicated thing, as you know, Adam. Public education and the privatization movement is an onion, has layer after layer after layer after layer. And the opposite side can say a student should not be punished by their zip code. I mean, everybody's on board with that, right? But for the folks that support public education, it's really a complex issue to break that down. And so I was up against Goliath. We had wins, AFT and also myself since 2014. We've had a lot of wins at the state level and the Birmingham level. The thing is that these things never came to surface because we stopped them before they started. And so a lot of people aren't aware of it. And someday, if you want to hear, if you haven't already, my story about the ESL students here in Birmingham back in 2016, I'd be more than happy to tell that story. I can show through personal experience how the State Department of Education sets Birmingham City School students up for failure. That's exactly what they did with our ESL students back in 2016. And that's what pushes me. And a lot of people can't really wrap their brain around that. But when we really look at Alabama and the history of public education, our Constitution, I mean, we all know that public education in Alabama was not meant for the Black and brown students. And so when I try talking about that in present terms, people kind of check out. They're like, that's a past, everything's fine. No, it's not. We get set up all the time for failure by the legislature and the Department of Education. And I can talk for hours on that, but we're limited right now. So I'll end right there, and I hope I answered your question.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, I think it's something that resonates with me, obviously, because, we've had some similar journeys. And
yes,
I guess in some ways I kind of was on the inside and the outside at the same time. And I think it's impossible to realize how difficult it is until you're there. Even if, I mean, you had been an activist and an organizer for years before getting on the board. And I had been involved in activism for quite some time before getting onto staff with AEA. We both had some idea about the reality of dealing with politics in Alabama, but nothing quite prepares you for it until you are inside the system, so to speak, and
right.
You can see the motive. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. It's just, I think that what Alabama folks are slowly coming around to is the power and the money that the charter folks have. And so I think that they had a hard time grasping on to those concepts because they felt like, when you're like a child shouldn't be punished by their zip code, that's just sounds so good and so right. And to try to break that down and talk about property and, the charter management organizations, right, and explain to people how that money is made. And how it is hidden behind these curtains. People, they'll ask me, well, how much money can you make? Why are they doing it? I don't understand. And so to explain to people, just how that whole thing works is difficult. And that's our challenge right now, especially in Birmingham, is to really break this down to something, I'm going to be honest with you, emotional, that people can grab onto, because that's exactly what the charter school people do. They get people with an emotional story and they come in and, right, and of course, we're talking about children. How can you not have your heart go out to these children? But my thing is that I want to raise all children up. I want all children to get the same quality education that my children got in Madison, Alabama. And the truth is, it's possible. And so I'm not going to settle for one charter school that has 150 people that we may or may not see positive results from. I believe in public education, and I believe all children should have the same opportunities and quality of education. To me, that's the basis. When you go on to all these other choices, how can they be successful when the very base of your education is rotten? I don't understand that. And I've said that over and over again, but yet, that's a little bit more of a complex thought. Our children shouldn't be punished by zip code. That's what everything goes back to. And I agree with that statement. And that's why we should give the legislature hell for not funding our schools equitably, because the first choice is theirs. When we're talking about choice in education, let's point our fingers at the legislature and say, what choice are you giving us? Public education is a choice, and you have an obligation to fund us equitably.
Amen, sister. I mean, that's exactly it. Our public schools have been sabotaged. And, it takes many forms. Sometimes it looks like charter schools coming from the outside or private school vouchers. Sometimes it looks like subcontracting and outsourcing within the school systems. And that covers the gamut from, custodial staff, but to software and technology and, curriculum. There are so many different ways in which money is made off our public school system and the public tax dollars. And I like what you said there. There is a choice. The first choice there is with the legislature. Passing a budget is literally the only thing they're required to do. And for year after year after year, they have chosen not to equitably fund Alabama's public schools, just as they have chosen not to fund adequate counselors and social workers and mental health professionals and school nurses, just as they have chosen not to fund all the different resources and wraparound services that we need to address the achievement gap, which the charter school folks will love to point to the achievement gap, just as they often co-opt language around civil rights and, as you said, feel-good stories from students that are hard to oppose. But, these choices have been made by folks with power and folks with wealth. But the vast majority of us rely on public schools. The vast majority of us, as you said, 90% of families are going to public schools. The public schools are the cornerstone of our community. And I think it's very important that we continue to educate the public, and we continue to connect educators with parents and community members to get on the same page and realize what has been happening to our schools, what could happen to our schools, and how we prevent that by coming together. Right. And you mentioned a good bit there in terms of Birmingham. Birmingham has been sort of ground zero for the charter schools in Alabama. I often say Huntsville City Schools was ground zero for privatization in terms of from the inside out. Birmingham's threat is kind of coming more external in some ways from the charter schools. But there's some conflict of interest, I think, in Birmingham politics there with the charter school movement. And is there anything you want to talk about in terms of Birmingham specifically and how charter schools have come into play there?
Right. So the charter school law has been in effect since 2015, and we're at 2022. And so, you got to ask yourself why, if the law was passed, we still have so few in Alabama. Birmingham has 2 so far that have opened already. And really the reason is because of the funding. It's expensive to have startup charter schools. And so a lot of folks were shy about coming into Alabama to really start charter schools because Alabama is such an island and it's so corrupt. So what happened is down in Montgomery, they wanted to have a charter school, and they asked, oh gosh, what was the name of the national organization? I'll come back to that. But
I think I know what you're talking about. Now, the name escapes me right now too. But is it like New Schools? Maybe
no.
Maybe I'm wrong on that.
New Schools is a part of it. It's a part of it. But it was one of the national, like, actually school chains. So they're like, we're not coming into Montgomery. Are you crazy? We're not doing it. So what Montgomery did was the Montgomery Ed Foundation stepped up. And they're like, okay, we'll hold the charter. Will you come in and be the charter management organization? And so they were like, oh, well, we'll do that. That's where the money is. So the Montgomery Ed Foundation is holding those charters there. And so then New Schools for Alabama, like you were mentioning, stepped up, and they were like, okay, so we don't have very many national charter school chains and management organizations wanting to come to Alabama. So what can we do? So they got a grant from the federal government, and they, in the grant proposal, which I obtained and dissected, basically everything they were saying was, we want charter schools in Birmingham and Montgomery. That's what they're focusing on. And they talked about how they were going to do that and how they were going to spend these millions of dollars getting charter schools in Birmingham and Alabama. And if we can put a pin in the failing school situation, the vouchers, if we get to that, it's very important, Adam. But maybe that might be for another day. But continuing down the path of the conflicts, so New Schools for Alabama is into charter schools like up to here. Basically, if you don't have New Schools for Alabama on your side, it's going to be very difficult for you as a charter school to be accepted and to be able to open. And so they're kind of the master. They're holding that key. So the person that ran against me, she has an organization, Black Alabamians for Education. She helped get the charter school law passed back in 2015. And so now she ran against me and she won. The people spoke and they elected her. And so now she is a Birmingham City School Board member. But the thing is that her job is to teach and help organizations get approved through the authorization process. The problem is she personally is an authorizer. School boards are authorizers, not school systems. The school board is the authorizer, and Birmingham chose to be an authorizer. So this person is an authorizer on Birmingham City Schools Board, and she gets paid to get schools, to give them knowledge and the capability to get accepted and to get their schools opened. And so, I felt that was a conflict, and I did, file a complaint about it, but it did come back that no, there's no problem, that the only way it's a problem is if she gets paid extra for a school to get authorized in Birmingham. Wow. So it's okay to get paid. You just can't get paid extra. I have a problem with that because, like you said, I work for AFT. And when I won my seat on the board, they told me that I couldn't even sit in on any panels discussing hiring and firing Birmingham AFT people. So
really?
So I was like under this strict wall of what I could do because we couldn't let AFT members benefit. AFT never, ever, ever has been in any contract with Birmingham City Schools, ever. We make our money off the members, right, when they join us. It's not Birmingham City School money, yet we have a school board member that negotiates and approves contracts for charter schools, and she gets paid by the very people that bring the charter schools to the board. I can't wrap my brain around it, but that was the ruling. And so I assume that it's okay. But we also get the letter of the law and the intent of the law. And I believe strongly that it's improper. I wish that the other school board, like let's take Freedom Prep, right? Freedom Prep came before this current school board, not mine, the current school board. I read the application from Freedom Prep, and they admitted that they sat down with a employee of Black Alabamians for Education. So that person did not reveal to the board that they had already been meeting with Freedom Prep. And so my thing is that how is that not a conflict? And why, most importantly, is the board not in an uproar? When I was on the board, they did everything they could trying to like get me in trouble and find me in a conflict and slap my hand in public to embarrass me and all of that stuff. And yet I reveal that this board member who said no to the application, but said she knows them and loves them and the application is great, but they're not ready to be an authorizer. And she was paid to sit down with them. I can't wrap my brain around it.
Certainly seems like a double standard in terms of the way, you and Birmingham AFT were treated versus this individual. Yes. And their connection to the charter school organizations. And I think, like you said, I mean, if anything, there's a much deeper connection with this because Birmingham AFT does not have contracts with the school system, does not, rely on school system money. So that's a wild one.
Pretty wild. Yeah.
I thought, man, the complaint I filed, I was like, oh, I got this, because the one thing I felt like the hurdle I had to overcome was to get the Ethics Commission to really understand the role of the board. Right. As an authorizer. How can you work for an organization that teaches people how to get past the authorizer and be an authorizer? Right. I still can't wrap my brain around it, but it is what it is. So I do, I think that's important for people to understand. And if we can quickly talk about Woodlawn Foundation and what they have done to bring charter schools in to Birmingham, we have other board members with connections. Bill Upps, who is a board member, has worked for the Woodlawn Foundation. We've already talked about Ms. Williams and the Black Alabamians for Education. Let's talk about Mary Bohm and her work with A+ Education Partnership, which is heavily involved in charter schools in Montgomery. And they're all supporters of charter schools. James Meadows, he's very well connected with the Woodlawn Foundation again, whose sole job it appears to be in Birmingham is to have charter schools. And then you have James Sullivan, that's with the Southern Company, which is basically Alabama Power, which is also neck deep in all of this. So we have 5 people right there that potentially are already sold on charter schools. And that's what I really tried to run on, was the fact that we have this privatization movement. We have these charter school folks that are taking over this board. But of course, there were no debates. Nobody debated in public. So we couldn't talk about the difference between me and Miss Williams. We couldn't talk about what Bill Upps really stood for against the current board member, Dodgy Hendricks, who was doing a fabulous job as board president. So let me say this real quick. You're probably going to cut me off because I talk too much. But look at this. We had a board of 9 members. We were working through a pandemic. And I challenge you to find any strong movement. We had little pockets of parents upset, of course, it was a pandemic. But I challenge you to find a strong movement against this school board. I am proud of the work that we did as 9 people on the school board, and the way we maneuvered it. And I'm proud of the work Dr. Sullivan did, as superintendent. So think about it. Almost the whole, except for Mary and Mary Bohm and Sonia Smith, the whole board turned over. When does that happen? When there's no problems. That happens when there's some public outcry against the board. But we were doing an amazing job. And yet, almost the whole board turned over. And that is because of the money that was behind the folks and the resources that was behind the folks, helping them get a leg up on, the election process. And so the people spoke, and it ended up being what it was. And, that's really that. It's really upsetting to me.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard enough to take on the machine, but it's even harder when you know you're not always going to win, and in fact, maybe most of the time you're not going to win. And in some ways, I remember being pleasantly surprised when you won. Initially thinking, oh my gosh, like one of us, a grassroots person, actually got on the board. But it's so difficult, and we're outnumbered even when we can get in those spaces. But I think your story illustrates the ways in which big money is really influencing these local school boards and local school districts. I mean, I think most listeners are probably pretty hip to the fact that our legislators are more or less bought and sold. But at the local level, it's a lot, it's a lot harder to pinpoint sometimes. Yeah. And it doesn't help that there's no local journalism anymore, that most, information is not readily available necessarily about, like you mentioned, there's not even debates in the school board elections. So it is easier for these big money interests to come in and influence a local school district and shape it towards whatever their desired outcomes may be. Maybe it's contracts, maybe it's construction, maybe it's charter schools, or some combination of it.
And so if I can, along that line, I'll just say this real quick. Birmingham City Schools, the company they use to sell their property, one of the principals in that company is or was up in, 2018. I haven't checked since then, was the treasurer for Alabama Charter School Association or something, AKA New Schools for Alabama.
Isn't that interesting?
Isn't that interesting? And I exposed that in a public board meeting. I had the data. I was passing it out to my board members. It's like, if this is not obvious, up to this point, you've got to pay attention to this. The very folks charged with selling our property helped get the charter school law written and passed.
Wow.
That was just shocking to me. And they tried like hell to, can I say that?
No, yeah, you can.
Okay. They tried like hell to sue me. They called around talking to lawyers we want to sue her, but I had the data. I had the information. What I'm saying is true. And so they couldn't sue me. But it's disturbing. It's disturbing. And, there's more and more and more things I could go on like that. But since you mentioned, the property and stuff, I felt like that needed to be
Oh,
said.
no, that's a great example. And yeah, I mean, you and I could probably have a monthly chat on connecting the dots of corruption in Huntsville City Schools and Birmingham City Schools and the Alabama legislature's role in all that.
Right.
But I think those were some, those are powerful anecdotes. And the scary thing is, it's not necessarily isolated to Birmingham. Birmingham's got a unique is uniquely situated because of the population size, because of some of the money that's circulating. They have Birmingham and their targets for charters, but some of these themes we're discussing in terms of big money influence, in terms of conflicts of interest, school boards that are working ulterior motives, those things are unfortunately not isolated. And so chances are, if you're listening to this, if you start digging, look into your local school system, and you might be surprised at what you'd find.
Yes. And the thing that I try to tell people is that I'm not going to say every charter school across this country is terrible, okay? But we're talking about Alabama. Every state has its own laws. And what has Alabama done for its Black and brown students, and in particular the high poverty Black and brown students? They refuse to fund the schools. They have this terrible voucher law. I mean, what? They're going to suddenly write a charter school law? It's going to be,
right.
Now we're going to give great schools to those students. No, absolutely not. Everything that this legislature does is to line their pockets and the pockets of their friends. And so, then we get into charter schools that are already open in Alabama. So there are some that are doing fairly well. We can't say that every charter school in Alabama is terrible, but let's look at the bad ones, right? Let's look at what happened in Montgomery. Let's look at Legacy Prep here in Birmingham and the problems they've had. I mean, that's the thing, is that this white power structure that is in charge of our school systems publicly across the state, the legislature, I mean, it wrote the charter school law. So why do we feel that now it's going to be different? That our Black and brown students and our high poverty students will be treated fairly and get an equal or equitable education under these charter schools? It's crazy. It really is. Look at the two schools in Birmingham. We have one on the east side and one on the west side. The one on the west side is Legacy Prep. And I assume, Adam, have you guys covered or talked about the financial problems that school had?
No, we haven't.
Do you want me to now? Do we have time?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So it came out in August that the principal of Legacy Prep, which was the original, she had been there, she was founder, that she was asking for the board to take out a loan to cover expenses. And they were like, whoa, wait, a loan? Well, by September, that principal has stepped down. That board did not even begin looking for a new principal until February. And so I suspected that there were a lot of problems going on there.
Right.
And eventually, some reporters got involved and they were able to do more research. And so there's basically like $300,000 missing. But the bookkeeping was so poor that they don't know who that's on. They don't know who's responsible.
Wow.
So everybody walked away fine. And now they, I guess, eventually hired a new principal. But I'm like $300,000. And basically, they just said, oops, we don't know who did it because this is so bad. And so we're just going to, start over. And it got very little coverage. I kept pushing and pushing, and I'm thankful that finally somebody covered it, because if that were a Birmingham City School, oh my goodness, I can't even imagine.
Yeah. Oh, they would have paraded the everybody involved on TV, and it would have been more proof that public schools are broken.
Right. And I tried. I talked to the folks and I said, listen, you got to run this article because you know what? You could be like, let's check in. It's been, however many years. Let's see how they're doing. I gave them perfect openings, and it still took a while till it got that obvious that it was finally covered. And I will say this, there have been accusations that the other charter school has been counseling out special needs students. I had parents prepared to give interviews about how they were counseled out of a charter school and ended up going back to a Birmingham city school. But by the time anybody took it serious, those parents were like, we're moving on. I don't want to visit that. That was like a year ago.
Right.
So we weren't able to move forward. Now, I'm not saying any school was doing anything. I'm just saying that the accusations were there.
Right.
And so these things aren't being covered. And again, compare the East and the West of Birmingham. The resources that they have, oh my goodness, it is really, it's almost like North Huntsville and South Huntsville, right?
Yeah.
And yet charter schools are supposed to bring equity. And the thing is it's only magnifying the inequities. And yet that's not being covered. People aren't talking about it.
Why do you think that is?
Because very powerful people are making money off of the privatization movement. I won't accuse Jay Love of anything, but Representative Love, when he was, in office, he goes and he gets, I think it was a charter school law passed or whatever. And he didn't even let his feet touch the ground. Once that was passed, he quit and went to school for the charter school. Went to work for the charter school people. Dr. Bice did the same thing, right? I'm just saying. We also talk about the former governor Riley, how involved he is in all of this. We got a lot of powerful people, making a lot of money off of it. Oliver
Robinson, perhaps?
Yes, thank you. Oliver Robinson sat on a charter school board as he was voting on charter school things in the legislature. So when he was convicted of the things he was, that was my first ethics filing, was to point out that he was voting on charter school things while he sat on a charter school board. The ethics folks did call me and want more information on it, but I don't know what happened. It never came. I think they already had what they needed. And again, I'm not accusing anyone of anything, but I'm talking about facts. And the facts are he sat on a board while he was there. And Hubbard, of course, he was the same way. I think some of his, and Adam, correct me if I'm wrong, help me with this. I think some of his convictions were tied up in that. Am I wrong?
There was an education company that he was connected to. And gosh, the name escapes me at the moment, but he definitely had... There was connections there with an education company that has done business with school systems in Alabama. So I think, you start connecting the dots, you start doing some power mapping, and you can figure out there are a lot of connections between the folks involved in the charter schools and the voucher movement with the broader power structure of this state.
Yes.
And, it's some of the wealthiest and most powerful people in the state are either directly involved with it or they're connected to people who are involved with it. And I think that's where you see a struggle to educate folks around it and a struggle to fight back against it. But I, for one, commend you for what you have been doing over the years, both as an activist, from the grassroots level, because I remember that charter school law you were one of the few people in the state that was really, really fighting hard on that, and you were doing that, a lot of it on your own, because I remember you posting in the Badass Teachers Facebook group, and us getting some information from that, and me manually copying and pasting every legislator email into my inbox because
right.
we were like, somebody's got to do it. Like, we're just doing it on our own. But you've been fighting the good fight for many years, and I just really appreciate all you've done for public education in Alabama to try to have better schools for all students. And Terri, was there anything maybe that you really wanted to get off your chest that we didn't get to today? I mean, obviously we could have a lot more conversations, you and I especially, about these topics.
Yeah. And so the thing that I think, because I was a Birmingham School Board member, and because I live in Birmingham and work for Birmingham AFD, if I can just say that there is a campaign coming that is going to miseducate Birmingham citizens, the parents, about what a conversion charter school is. And I think the most important thing right now is to tell people that conversion charter schools are only different from a startup charter school in one way. And that is that they don't have to have a charter management organization doing their finances. And so that means that they come in, they take over our school, they take over our students, they take everything in the school. They walk in, it's easy. They don't need much money. They have to hire a charter management organization to do their curriculum. They don't have to for their finances, but we all know they will. Because that's what they want, is control of the money, and to put it behind this wall of, a charter management organization. That's going to make it difficult for the public to see the public dollars. So here in Birmingham, they're going to tell people conversion charter schools are good because Birmingham City Schools will be able to control them and oversee them. That's simply not true. They will have no more oversight over a conversion charter school than a startup. And I understand this is outside the scope of what we have talked about, but that's really the campaign that I'm on right now, because back when our mayor, Woodfin, was on the school board, he was trying to convince them to be a conversion charter school district, to vote yes for it. And that's the exact argument he was using, that we have more control with the conversion charter school. And that's just simply not true. And so I'm working really hard. AFT's working really hard. A lot of other wonderful people that support public schools. We're working hard to get people to understand that voting yes on conversion charter schools is no different than accepting a startup charter school. So that's again, we're talking about how nuanced things are, right?
Yeah.
All they have to say is a child shouldn't be punished by their zip code. We have to explain the difference between a conversion and a startup. So it makes it really difficult. So I'll stop right there.
No, I'm so glad you wrapped up with that, though, because I wanted to know kind of like what was on the horizon, what are you working on? And I think that's a very important issue. And it's something that I think is going to be a increasingly, relevant.
I imagine
not just in Birmingham, but
I
elsewhere.
imagine this conversation is going to be particularly relevant in the next 6 to 8 months.
Right.
Yes,
and so
I believe so. The feeder pattern that was created under Dr. Herring, I believe has made it very convenient for places like the Southern Company to step in and head up a feeder pattern and say it's going to be a STEM feeder pattern. I think what we're going to start seeing is Ramsey High. Let's word it this way. Southern Company Ramsey High School, right? Now, I'm starting rumors, but I kind of not. Because I think that's what we're going towards, is to have high school feeder patterns that these companies are going to be head of. and our children are going to be put into these pipelines. And so that's really, it's called a portfolio district. And I feel like, I know that's the direction that Birmingham City Schools is going. And it's unfair. It's unfair. If it's a good thing to do, then do it to Huntsville, do it to Vestavia, do it to all these other districts. You know, they're not going to, because it's not a good thing. It's turning our children into dollar signs.
Absolutely. Well, Terri, thank you so much. Keep us posted on this. Keep us posted on the campaign around conversion charter schools. And let's definitely stay in touch as education issues pop up this legislative session, as we both know they will. So hopefully this will be the first of many conversations on the Valley Labor Report. Really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us.
Well, thank you so much. And matter of fact, the state in the NAACP, they had their state conference, and we actually had 2 white Republican men come and talk about their laws. You know what I'm trying to say, Adam? Help me out.
The school choice law?
Oh,
no.
gosh.
You know what I'm trying to say. The divisive concepts and the CRT.
Gosh.
Oh my gosh, do I have stories to tell you about that meeting. So that'll be another day.
Okay.
But if you want to hear what these folks said to the NAACP, I'll be more than happy to tell you.
Yeah, we're going to have another conversation about that, because that sounds pretty interesting.
A teaser.
You know you're opening a can of worms with me,
man.
right?
Yeah.
Wow.
Okay, so yeah, we definitely have to have you back, and that's going to be one of the topics. Well, thank you so much, Terri. We appreciate it. And where can folks find out more information about Birmingham AFT?
Well, we do have a Facebook page, Birmingham AFT on Facebook.
Okay.
And
cool.
they can always hit me up. I'm Terri Rector Michael on Facebook. I'm very public about my information because I was an elected official. So, you know, can I give my phone number?
If you want to.
Well, it's public information, so I don't care.
Yeah.
It's 256-679-7135. So if anyone wants to talk about the information I've given tonight, you know, I'd be more than happy to do that.
Awesome.
Thank you very much for taking the time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well,
Have a good
thank you
night.
for having me on. You guys are awesome. I really enjoy your show every Saturday.
I appreciate
Thank you.
that. Thank
Thanks.
you.
You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.